Hello Linux fans, thank you for watching. So this is a new series I'm calling Gnome Quest. So over the past few weeks I've been running Gnome primarily as my main desktop on an Arch-based distro called Antergos or Antergos. And speaking of that, you can call Gnome Gnome or Gnome, so take your pick. I'll probably in this video series refer to it as Gnome because I always feel silly when I'm saying Gnome. Anyway, today we're going to focus in on one very important tool for the Gnome desktop, and that is the Gnome Tweak tool. Now, if you're running an Ubuntu-based distribution, you should be able to find that within the Software Center. If not, I'm going to put a link to some terminal commands where you can install that as well. Now, on an Arch-based distro, you're going to find that within your Software Center, and it's also in the AUR. Now, in my case, it was pre-installed. So, you'd first want to do a search for the Tweak tool to see if it's pre-installed within your distribution. If not, I suggest that the Tweak tool is the very first thing that you install because it opens up a world of extensions and other settings and things that really complete the Gnome desktop experience. I really like Gnome because it has a clean interface. It's very modern looking. It does a good job with font rendering, but it's lacking in a lot of areas. So this series will break down those areas. We're going to take a look at extensions, various settings, and other things that may improve your user experience with the Gnome desktop. Now, the video series is not intended to sell you on the merits of Gnome and why you should use Gnome. I simply want to share with you how I set things up to, I think, improve the overall UI and feel of the desktop operating system. So with that said, let's jump into Gnome Tweak Tool. Alright, so Tweak Tool again is going to add many features and settings and extensions, and we're going to break those down today in a little more detail than I've done in the past in some other videos when I've taken a look at Gnome. So we're going to start off here with the tabbed interface on the left. So you've got Appearance, Desktop, Extensions, Fonts, Keyboard and Mouse, Power, Startup Applications, Top Bar, Typing, Windows, and Workspaces. And what we're going to find here is there are lots of settings in some of these tabs and a few settings in other tabs. Now the Appearance tab is going to open up lots of options, of course, for the look of the overall UI. So here we could toggle on, for example, the global dark theme. Now that requires a restart or logging out and logging back in for it to take place, but if you're a person who likes that overall dark look within your Windows and File Explorer and everything, there's your option. Now under Theme, you're going to find that you can change those options pretty much on the fly. So for example here, we're going to go from Numix Frost Light, which was built in, to Numix Frost. And immediately you'll see we have a change here in the top bar here of our window. Now I've also added the Sardi arc icons. By default here we had Numix Square, so we're going to change that back to the default. And you'll see immediately a change here in my dock at the bottom, and you'll also see a change within the application menu drop down. And so Gnome does an exceptionally good job for people who enjoy customizing and tweaking the look of their desktop. I find that most things apply very well, and if you use more current icon themes and more current GTK themes, that they all apply extremely well within the Gnome desktop environment. Alright, I'm going to take this back to Sardi Arc, and then you could also change your cursor. Now currently I only have one option here, but I could install, for example, the Breeze theme, which I think looks very nice for your mouse cursor. And then you have options for the shell theme, and we're going to get into that later as well as part of the video series, but currently my only option is the Numix Frost. Here you could also toggle on or off animations. Alright, so our next tab is Desktop. Now this is an area where, again, it's personal preference. So personally, I like to keep a nice clean desktop without icons and folders on my desktop. But I know some of you watching prefer to have folders and shortcuts and things like that on your desktop, and so here you can toggle on what I call the live desktop, and now you'll have options to show, for example, the home folder. You could toggle that on or off. Network servers, trash, and then mounted volumes. Now there are times when I do keep mounted volumes on and turn off all of the other folders. That way if I insert a USB flash drive, which I'm going to do, I'm going to pop one in, you'll see that pop up. Actually, no I'm not, because all of my USB ports are being taken up as I'm recording. So you would see then your USB device pop up on your desktop. Alright, so then you have options here for background or wallpaper. Now default is zoom, and I find that's best, but you could change it to, for example, wallpaper. And here we're going to see some change. You'll see it's not zoomed out. It's kind of a continuation of that wallpaper based on the width and resolution of the monitor. So I'm going to take that back to zoom. Stretched I find doesn't do very well. It can distort the image that's on your wallpaper. Spanned, scaled, none, centered, and zoom. I find the default zoomed is the overall best look. It zooms the wallpaper in without any distortion. You could also change that location, the image location, but there are other easier ways to do that as well, which we'll look at later. Then also you could change your lock screen, and you have the same options there with zoom, stretch, so on and so forth. Alright, next we have extensions. Now this is an area that's very, very important in my opinion to get the Gnome desktop set up in a way that is more functional for a desktop user. And again, we're going to get into a lot of these extensions in later videos of this series, but I'll just highlight a few here that I always have in place. So I always toggle on application menu, dash to dock, that's one that I always turn on. Places status indicator, so application and places give you drop downs here. Now I consider myself a desktop user, so a lot of what I'm going to go through as far as the extension videos will be focused on extensions that I think improve the desktop user experience as opposed to the touch interface or tablet user experience. So again, look for more videos going through a lot of the details on a lot of the extensions, and there are pages and pages of extensions. Some do one thing and do one thing very well. Others do a multitude of things. So look forward to sharing those with you. Now the next area I really appreciate, which is fonts. And I think that Gnome does a great job out of the box with font rendering, but this gives you options for window title changes, the complete interface. Really it encompasses every area with which you'll see fonts within your operating system, and you can go in and alter those and change those. Now personally I'll go in and tweak these later, but two options you may want to look at right out of the box is with hinting, and typically what works best for my monitor is slight, and I can never pronounce anti-aliasing properly, so I'm going to butcher it. But here you may also want to experiment with RGBA versus grayscale on your particular monitor. Now the scaling factor here, this is an area that if you have a laptop, for example, that has a high resolution screen, you may find that the fonts are too small. So here you can scale those up on the fly, and you'll notice when we do that, you get additional options such as zoom, large text, and if you're vision impaired, you could, for example, change that quite easily to high contrast. Alright, so we're going to take that back down. So this is an area you may want to spend a little time with just to get the best look you can. The next area, keyboard and mouse, this is an area I really don't mess with much. I kind of leave things default, but I know that many of you out there have particular ways you like to set up your keyboard and your mouse. Now here you could toggle on show all input sources. So I have an external mouse and keyboard, for example. If you toggle that on and reboot the system, you'll have additional options that pop up for those settings. You could change the key theme. You can switch between overview and desktop. So here we have left super, that you could change that to right super. Also you've got some additional mouse settings here for acceleration profile. So there we have default. You could change that to adaptive or flat. Show the location of the pointer. Middle click paste, I have that turned on. And then under touchpad click method, you could go from default to fingers to none or to areas. So I'm going to set that back to default. And again, I don't spend a lot of time here. I kind of go with the default settings, which seem to work fine for me. Now we've got a few options under power. So when the power button is pressed, you could control the action. Now I keep mine on nothing because on my particular laptop, which I'm using here for this video, I have a volume key that's very close to the power button, and sometimes I inadvertently hit the power button when I mean to be hitting the volume button. So I've got that set to nothing so that I don't hibernate or suspend when I don't mean to. But you could go in and set that up. And I believe by default that is nothing. Then you also have an option, so when the laptop lid is closed, you could toggle on Do Not Suspend. Now that might be a good use case scenario if you're using your laptop, you're out, you're traveling, and you want to shut the lid, but you don't really want it to suspend. You just want to shut the lid momentarily and then open it back up, so you've got that option there. Now you can also set up startup applications. So I know many of you have particular applications that you like to start up at boot, and so you could go in and add those applications here. Also, top bar settings. We've got a few options here. You can show the application menu. You could also toggle on or off the date. You could show seconds at the time. And then for the calendar, let's go into calendar. So that's what default looks like, or you could show week numbers. And now you'll see week numbers. So we're going to set that back. Now typing, this is an area that I'll just straightforward with you here, I've never messed with. But I know many of you have particular settings that deal with additional languages and things like that. So this is an area where you could go in and for your typing control things. So right Alt under various languages, Japanese keyboard options, for example, Korean keyboard options, the Alt Win key behavior. So lots of things to go in. I know many of you have very particular settings that you use for your keyboard setup. And again, this area is available through Gnome Tweak Tool. I just have not spent any time with it. Alright, let's move on to Windows. Now you've got lots of options here, such as dialogues that you can toggle on or off, automatically raise windows, resize with secondary click, window action key here. In this case, it's set to the super key, which is the Windows key. You could disable that. You've got a focus mode. You've got double click, middle click, and secondary click options. So for example, here on double click, by default it's toggle maximize. You could change that to minimize or none or whatever works for you. And you've got all of those options through the title bar actions. Then you have title bar buttons. So we could toggle off maximize, for example, and you'll see that disappeared there in the title bar. And the same with minimize. Now the high DPI window scaling, I have found on my particular system messing with that really causes things to enlarge way more than they should. So window scaling has never worked for me, but if you have on this particular external monitor anyway, but if you have a high DPI monitor or screen on your laptop, for example, you may want to take a look at window scaling to see if when you're using it, especially if you have aging eyes like myself, sometimes the fonts are way too small to really be able to see and interact with. So that may help you there. And then lastly, we have Workspaces. Now Workspaces are additional desktops that you can use. So depending on how many applications you have open, you may find that you need additional workspaces. And I know many of you work with multiple workstations where you'll have multiple applications open, per workstation. Now you could set this up to static, which I have here, but by default you'll find that dynamic is set up. Now I typically keep it on dynamic and just let the system adjust the workspaces as needed. But you've got options here too to only create workspaces on the primary display. So if you're working with multiple monitors, that's a setting that may be beneficial to you. So as you see here, as we step through appearance and desktop extensions, so on and so forth, that the Gnome Tweak tool really adds an entire new selection of options and features for you that really, I think, take the Gnome desktop to a whole new level. So as we continue with the Gnome Quest, which will be the name of the series, next I'm going to get into some of the extensions, and we'll do videos per extension on some extensions, and we may combine a couple of extensions per video just depending on the level of complexity and features with that extension. So stay tuned for more Gnome Quest videos. I hope this is helpful, and thanks for watching.